Hello, this is a Pacesetter training video and a series of videos on Sketch. This video is going to be dealing with sketching roofs. If you need some other information on general navigation, interiors, sketches, there's another video for that. As I said, there's a series of videos here. Please check that out if you need a refresher or if you're new at Sketch. So, before we begin on some of the roof stuff, I'd like to kind of go over a few things just to make you aware of some fundamental ideas you want to keep in mind when you're sketching roofs, and some of the labeling as well. So some things to think about, and we'll go over a few of the tools that are commonly used during sketching roofs. So before we begin, I want to make sure you understand that the labeling system in Xactimate, when you drop a different roof shape in, it will give the roof shape a label numerically with the name roof. So it will start with roof 1, then again subsequently roof 2, roof 3, roof 4. That applies whether you're pulling in new roofs in from your roofing tool or using a shortcut, or using the brake tool, for instance, the square brake tool, and pulling roofs off of an existing roof. Any new roof shape will be given a label, a name. Roof 1, roof 2, roof 3, etc. Obviously, you'll also see, you may be familiar with the facet labels. These are, again, alphanumeric, F1, F2, F3. They are in order, a chronological order. And that will apply with any new roofs you pull in. That is what we see here on our annotation list, which is the facet names, the square footage of each of those facets, the squares of the facet, and the pitch. A couple of things to keep in mind too. By default, when you drop a new room in, that roof is going to be sitting on the ground. It is going to have 0-foot elevation. That is very important to think about and understand, because what a lot of new adjusters or people that are new to Sketch sometimes don't know and have a problem with is when they start trying to build roofs and creating an actual roof that's in the real world with their insured, they may have problems when they intersect different roof shapes where they just can't get the pieces of the puzzle to fit together properly to actually look like the roof in the real world. And usually a part of that problem is, there's some various reasons, but one of the main ones is that they don't have their different roof shapes at various levels of height off the ground. Sometimes the way roofs are built, we have to have different levels of height off the ground to intersect those roofs to make the roof look properly and intersect properly and create the correct valleys or just create the correct square count. And we'll look at some instances of this, of why that's important during this video shortly. The other thing to think about by default, other than the elevation being at 0 feet on the ground, is that most all the roof shapes you drop in are going to have a 412 pitch, which we can see in our annotation tool. There is an exception or two to that rule. For instance, if we drop our menu down and we use the turret shape, we will notice that those facets are at 1212 pitch. So just keep that in mind. Again, this is not a commonly used roof shape. Commonly, it's going to be gables, hips, maybe half hips or partial hips, and sometimes maybe Dutch hips, but certainly full hips and gables are by far the most common roof shapes you're going to work with. And again, by default, those are on the ground when you drop them into Sketch, and they are 412 pitches. The other things you want to keep in mind is just measurements. Obviously, our eave measurements is giving flat measurements of the eaves. Obviously, this is very simple. On rakes, and obviously hips do have a rake, that's what these measurements are. And let's drop, just as another way to look at it, we'll drop in a little gable beside this. So if you were to look at the gable, and we look at the way these are measured, it'll be similar on the hips, but on the rakes, when you see this small tick to this tick, or maybe in the middle it stops, which is what this one is, the outside measurement, these are flat measurements on the ground. So this measurement of 27 foot 3 inches is from this eave to this eave, measured from tip to tip on the ground, flat measurement. Likewise, these two measurements are 13 foot 8 inches. Let me zoom in a little bit so you may be able to see this better. From this eave to the ridge, 13 foot 8 inches, flat measurement on the ground, same as this. Then the inside measurement has this little icon by it. Looks like a little V basically, but it's a little pitch. It's a little slope pitch on a roof. And it's telling you that this measurement inside here is the rake measurement, the actual slope measurement from the eave to the ridge, but up the slope. And obviously, because this is pitched at a 412, this measurement is longer than the flat measurement. And the higher we pitch up, the longer this interior measurement will be. So just keep that in mind. Which you may already know on sketching with most of the shapes, if you click on the sketch, you can drag with the blue handles to the measurements that you want. You can also click in the measurements and then type on the keyboard the measurements that you want. This is 14 foot 8 inches currently. Let's say we want it at 15 feet. Enter. If you want to change the eave links, you can certainly grab the side handles and do that. Or you can select the roof and just tap either of the side handles, and then the eave measurement will highlight blue, and now once it's blue we can click in and type a number as well. So let's say 35 feet. Those are just some quick tools. There are some shortcuts that you can learn for dropping roofs in and doing things. It just depends on how your workflow works for you. Another thing you want to think about and look at is you'll notice that inside the rake and eave edges, you'll see these dotted lines. If you click on them, or rather mouse over them, they will become solid blue. These are the walls, inside the interior walls. And so this measurement from this wall to this eave is an overhang. By default, it's 16 inches. And then this wall overhang to the edge of this rake to the shingle, 12 inches. Those are the default. Keep in mind, you can change these. You can go into the properties, which we'll look at properties here at the end of the video to go over a few things. And you can either go into properties and move these overhangs around and say, instead of 16 inches Xactimate, I want you to be 6 inches. And that will move this wall in. Or you can simply click on the wall, highlight it, and grab the handle and drag the wall in. You can do it that way if you like. Sometimes you need to use this. It's not common that you will need to be moving walls in and out, but sometimes you may need to do that. Just keep in mind that you can do that through properties or clicking on the walls directly. So let's kind of go in and delete this, and let's look at some of the tools. But before we do that, let's look at that situation where we're talking about how important it is to have roof structures at different heights. So for instance, let's say that we have this hip, and there is a little room, let's say on the back. We'll say this is the front of the house, this is the back. Let's say that we have a little gable back here, and the ridge of that gable comes up and intersects not too far up from the eave on this hip right here. In other words, the eaves are not at the same height. Let me let you see this. So let's drag this roof in. We'll rotate it, and we'll just intersect it real quick. As you notice, all the eaves are at the same height on the two roof shapes. If we look at it in 3D view, we will see this. All the eaves are exactly the same height. Now, by default, remember, they're at 0 elevation. So technically, this whole roof structure, both of these roofs, are on the ground. This roof is sitting on the ground. There's no height underneath it. So this works fine. But sometimes we need to get roofs off the ground. As an example, we do here, because what we say is, in the real world, this ridge doesn't connect into this slope this high up. It connects down here. And let's say that we measured the valley on the actual roof, and it was, we'll say 3.5 or 4 feet. We'll just say 4 feet as an example. Well, right now, we're at 16 foot 5 inches. Now, to get this right, to get these valleys and the height and everything right, you first need to get your rakes and everything right. So let's say that the rakes are 12 foot 5 inches. Right now we're at 11 foot 11 inches on our rakes. So let's drag those out to 12 foot 6 inches. So now we get our rakes right. The reason why you need to do that in this situation is look at the valley. The wider we make this structure, the longer the valleys are. Now we're at 20 foot 6 inches. If we make it narrow, 8 foot 6 inches. So you want to make sure we get these measurements in the field, which you would have this measurement, how far this bumps out from the wall, and what the rakes are. So let's say, again, 12.5 feet, 12 foot 6 inches, okay? And then let's say that the valley we measured was 4 feet. So what we need to do is raise this roof off the ground. The way to do that, there's two ways to do it. You can go into properties, and then you can go down to eave heights and drop this double chevron down. You'll see they're all at 0. You can change it here, or you can right click on the roof name, adjust height. It's a little bit quicker in my opinion, and type the number in. So let's say we want to get it up off the ground, but we're not sure how much. You could guess and you could put a number in, but to get into ballpark, one thing to keep in mind is if we right click on this roof and go to adjust height, it will tell us the height of the ridge. Right now it's right at 4 feet high. So this ridge right here is 4 feet off the ground. The eaves are 0. This ridge is 4 feet. So if this ridge is 4 feet and we want to get this eave right underneath this, where this ridge is, we need to raise this roof up about 3-ish feet. We can play with it. So let's start with 3 feet. So let's go to the main hip, adjust height, and just type 3. Watch what happens. Now we've raised this roof off the ground, which now this ridge is intersecting much lower down on this hip slope, and it's forming shorter valleys. Let's look at this in 3D view. Okay, well that's looking sort of like we want, although we want to draw it correctly, so we want those valley lengths to be the correct length. And again, let's say we measured it in the field and it was 4 foot. Well, we're at 4 foot 2 inches. We're really close. We could technically probably just leave it alone. Keep in mind that you can lower and raise roofs up and down per inch. So you could go, if we wanted to get this to be, try to get it to be exactly 4 feet, we would need to, what? Will we need to raise this roof up or lower this roof? We would need to raise it up a little bit more, the main roof, to make this a little shorter. So let's try that. Let's adjust the height again to 3 foot 1 inch, which would be 3.08 if you convert to decimals. By the way, if you don't convert to decimals, I highly recommend you learn that technique. We have another training video that tells you how to do that and why it is important and much faster and more efficient to convert feet and inches to decimals in your head and in any way you're writing and typing. Take a look at that video. So that went to 3 foot 10 inches. So we really can't get it to 4 feet exactly. I would side on the side of the insured in this case, and I would give it back to them and raise it back down to 3, and then 3 foot, and let's just leave it at 4 foot 2 inches. So that's an example of why raising roofs up and down in elevation are important. Let's look at another instance. Let's say that you have a dormer. You got 2 dormers here. So there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can grab the gable tool. You can shape your dormer how you want it based on your measurements in the field. That's one way to do it. And then you can drag this into the slope. But remember, when I've just dropped this roof in, the default elevation is 0 feet. It's on the ground. Now this one we still have raised up. So let's get back to default and drop this back down to 0 feet, just like we started. Now we're going to do the dormer. Again, we drag this roof in, it's 0 feet. We've made the measurements, or at least we've made the rakes. The links we'll have to play with once we drop it in. But let's say in the field you did measure it and it's 3 foot 6 inches on the rakes. Right now we're at 3 foot 2 inches. Let's just click in there and make that 3 foot 6 inches. That would be 3.5 in decimals. So now we have the correct rakes. Again, we'll play with the length of the eaves once we get it in here. You would have taken that eave measurement in the field though. And let's say that it is 6.5 feet. That's what we're going to go with. Or let's say 7 feet. Make it easy. 7 foot eaves, okay? So we've drawn or pulled in a gable. Now another way you can do that is to drop your roof selection menu down and select dormer. It's similar. When you click this, it opens up the dormer entry menu. You can type in the eave heights, overhangs, the slopes, and things like this. Here you can directly type in the heights. That's one way you can do it. But let's go back to help you understand. Again, we're dealing with why heights of roofs are important. We've just dropped a normal little gable in to be our dormer. So if we drop this in the roof, since the eaves are the same elevation right now, that dormer is going to disappear inside basically the attic of this roof. It's there, but you can't see it. It's inside. So what do we need to do? We need to raise this dormer up in elevation to get it to intersect with the slope. Again, we know that this is at 0 feet elevation. So let's get it up and say, let's say 3 or 4 feet. Let's try it, see what it looks like. Let's try 4 feet to start. Well, that's pretty close actually. That's not too bad. Now maybe our pitches are a little off. See, we're at 6 foot, or rather 6.83 in our pitch. We can change that in our properties if we want to go down to, let's say it's a 412.2. So we went to properties, slope height rise over 12 inches. Let's say all of them are the same, yes, and let's just make it 412. Now we're good to go. There's our dormer, and then we said this was 7 feet. So let's drag this out to 7 feet. Or again, you can click in the measurement here and type it. So let's take a look at this. Oh, there's a dormer. Looks pretty good. Now, for instance, though, let's say that you had typed in 2 feet with this height. Let's see what that looks like, 2 feet off the ground. Oh, and now we're way down here, and we can't even get our correct measurement here because it's extending out beyond the roof a little bit, maybe. That's 8 feet, but yeah, look at that. That's not going to work, and that's not where probably the dormer is. It's higher up on this roof. No amount of stretching or pulling this out is going to get this higher on the roof. You have to raise this roof shape up off the ground higher in elevation. So you would simply do that. We had it right. So if you started at 2 and you had this drawing, you would know that, okay, that dormer is just too low. I need to raise it up higher. Well, let's try 3 feet. Okay, well, I'm at 7 foot here. Let me look. And you go, yeah, that'll work. The square count won't really change. But if you want to get it up higher where it probably really is installed, fine. Raise it up a little bit more. Right click, adjust height, 4 feet. Click away and then check your measurements again. 7 feet. Maybe that's more like it. Again, keep in mind, if you have this drawn like this, with the correct rakes of 3 foot 6 inches at a 412 pitch, and the eaves are correct. So this is the actual measurements. Where this is located on here, higher, low, it doesn't matter. It won't change the square count. Now, one thing that might change the square count a little bit is look at where the walls are. Those are pretty narrow walls. Yeah, maybe. But maybe you want to open this up a little bit, and maybe that overhang is a little bit more. So let's zoom down here. Pull this out a little bit. Click on the wall. Drag it out towards the eaves. And let's look at this. Yeah, maybe that looks a little bit more correct. And you're giving a better square count. It's not much square feet. Don't get too tedious on this, but just keep in mind you can make these adjustments, and in certain situations you will need to do that. So that's an example of height. Another real quick one, let's say, is, get rid of this. Let's say that you have a little shed roof down here over the front porch. Again, we're at 0 feet. If we drop a flat shed roof, now this is another little bit different. You'll notice when I drop the shed roof in, it's at 412. Facet F5, 412 pitch. But let's say in the real world, this little porch doesn't stick off of this wall 12 foot 8 inches. It's only like, say, 5 feet. Let's say 6 feet. Okay, so we pull this down to 6. Now notice that our pitch has changed. The reason why is because this is the lower eave. If you're not familiar with the shed roofs, this little arrow on shed roofs, the arrow is pointing up the slope. That's the direction going upwards. That means this eave by default is at 0 elevation. It's on the ground. It's locked on the ground. And this is the upper elevation that's off the ground. So if you change the length of this, then Xactimate won't let you make this eave height below the ground and keep the relative 412, so it squishes it down, and all it can do is make the pitch higher. But again, remember, we can go into the properties of this. Even though we've moved this down to the rake is 6 foot long, let's go into the properties and just reset the pitch from 1012, or 1112 is what it is, to 412. Now we're good. Okay, so let's say it's over the porch and it's this long, and you stick it into the wall, and look what happens. That doesn't look right. Why? Because this roof is sitting on the ground. This should intersect the wall below this roof, so we need to get this off the ground. Simple. Same thing we've been doing. Raise it up off the ground. Make it 10 feet, 6 feet. It doesn't matter. You put it 30 feet. Doesn't really matter. We'll do 20 feet. This is what it'll look like. It doesn't matter. We're not drawing architectural drawings. What we're concerned about is intersecting roofs in Sketch and drawing them in Sketch properly to reflect the way the actual construction is on that roof in the real world. And we're concerned about getting correct square counts and measurements. That's what we're going for. We're not trying to make it look correct. Again, we don't care if that's a 30-foot wall and this shed roof is down at the bottom on the ground. The square count's going to be correct if we slide this up or down the wall. It doesn't matter what it looks like. So that's why you might need to get these roofs up and down. That's some very, very simple stuff right there. Keep that in mind. So another thing that you may want to consider when you're drawing roofs is using some of the properties and some of the functions within the property. So let's look at this briefly. One of these that are very, very important is something called subgrouping. So let's say that you are going to replace this roof, and it's a hip that has some bump outs on it. We want to subgroup all of this together, these different shapes. Now, if you pull separate roofs in, now let's get another hip, for instance. And you'll notice when I pull this in, it has a separate roof name, roof 2, but it's not subgrouped. These are two separate roofs. Even if I intersect these together, let's get this back down to 0 elevation. Remember, we brought it to 20 on the previous scenario. Okay, so here's our little intersected roofs. As far as Xactimate goes, these are two separate roofs in regards to how it in the background calculates square count and measurements. Yes, in the actual sketch and the drawing, they're intersecting and connected. But in the background, Xactimate is not calculating all of these two together, all of these measurements together as a single calculation on square count or perimeter, stuff like that, valley. So what you're going to do is subgroup these together. And the way you tell is Subgrouping, by the name, will have a little parentheses with a number in it. That tells you that that roof structure is subgrouped to one of the other roofs. It won't tell you which one. You can go in properties and look. So let's subgroup this manually to roof 1. Highlight it, go to properties, or you can right click and go to properties, or you can simply double click on the roof label. And if you notice, underneath the general heading, you'll see subgroup of, and it's set to none. Let's drop this menu down and set that to roof 1. We want to subgroup this roof to roof 1. And if we click away, we will see now that we have roof 2 with a little number in parentheses, the number 1. And again, this will be also a numeric order the more roofs you subgroup. So if we look in the estimating tree, and we go down at the bottom of the tree and look at roof 1, not this one, this is another sketch level, we're on sketch 5. Roof 1 here, this room includes both of those roofs. Let's go back and see what it looks like if we ungroup them. They'll be separate. Let's set this back to no subgrouping. Now we're back to roof 1 and roof 2, no parentheses. And now we'll see 2 separate rooms in our estimating tree down here. But we don't want this because let's say we want to replace the entire roof. So we want our roofing room, one roofing room, to contain all of the square count of the shingle part of the roof. So we want to combine all that together into one room. That's subgrouping. And again, we did that manually. But here's an easier way to do it. Let's use the square break tool. This is going to be your friend. This is a very powerful tool used very commonly. If we use the square break tool, there's a couple things we can do that's the most commonly used. One, in this case, is just click anywhere on an eave. You can do this on rakes as well. You'll get 2 handles. We're going to hold the control key down and pull this shape out. And it will pull the same type of shape that the main roof you're pulling from is. So this is a main hip. You're going to pull the hip off. Look at this. It's already subgrouped. That's one of the powerful advantages of using the break tool. It already subgroups sub-roofs that you pull off from the main roof. Anywhere you do that. We can reshape all of this, of course, as normal. Oh, let me pull this back in. That's a little bit bigger than we wanted. We can do another one. We can pull another roof and use the break tool off of roof 2 using the break tool. I can click way over here. You've seen this commonly with these sort of accordion type hip roofs. This is the way you kind of draw those. It's just continual hips being smaller using the break tool. I've dropped the break tool on. I want to hold my control key and pull this out here. Now we have another little hip. Very, very simple. But if you'll notice, we have 3 roof shapes. They're all labeled differently. Roof 1, roof 2, roof 3. And roof 2 and 3 have subgroupings. We can pull these right out of the roof. They are separate roofs, but they're interconnected automatically using the square break tool, and they're already subgrouped. Very, very powerful. So now if we go back again and look at our estimating line item, we're going to have one roof at the bottom, roof 1. But all 3 of those roofs are being calculated together in here. Very, very powerful. Another use of the square break tool is we can get 3 handles. So what we've been doing here is we've been on an eave and we just clicked over here. We've moused over, and you notice that when we're moving our mouse, we have different measurements between the tick of where our mouse is. We can click anywhere we want. But if you notice, if we just mouse over and click once, we get 2 handles. This is what we did down here. We can also click the break tool and hold our control key down and mouse over and hold the mouse button down while we're holding the control key down and drag a little blue line, and now we have 3 ticks. This is very useful for pulling another roof shape off of an existing roof in the middle of the eave. As so, I'm holding the control key down again and I'm pulling this shape off. Now, can we do it the other way with just 2 ticks and move the shape down? Sure. You can do that. Click here, 1 click. You've only got 2 handles or two ticks. We can pull this off. And yes, we can click that roof and drag it down in the middle somewhere. You can certainly do it that way. Just keep in mind there is another way to use the brake tool. Very, very powerful tool. So one other thing you might want to think about when you're sketching roofs is making sure that all of your pitches are correct. You may have some roofs that are 412, 512, but maybe some of the pitches are 812. You need to make sure those pitches are set correctly so that you can calculate the correct amount of squares to input that number manually in your Xactimate tree to pay for steep charges. That may be for high charges as well. So this is a little bit different on these, but let's go back and redo some of this roof and change this roof. Let's say that we drop this roof in by default. Again, all the pitches are 412, but let's say, which is common, the 2 main front and back slopes are 612 and the 2 side hips are 1012. So let's go do that in the properties. So we're going to select the roof, go to properties. You're going to go down to the pitch area. This is where it says slope rise. Typically this may be closed. It's a little double chevron here. You can open it up. And first it's going to ask you, are all of the pitches the same? Yes or no, A and B? Well, nope, they're not the same. In this case, though, A and B are the same. Slope A and B are the same, yes, but we want to change the pitch, remember, to 612. There we go. So now it changes this dramatically, but now we're going to fix these 2 side hips. Remember, we wanted those at 1012, so that's C and D, C, D. So let's put 1012. Now we're looking good. Let's take a look at this roof. Now, of course, you will need to put pitch gauges on these in the field and take photographs of that and document these pitches, obviously. Now we have our different pitches. So we would pay for steep charges on F3 and F4, but not F1 and F2. These are 612. We have to be 712 or above to qualify for paying for steep charges. So these would not qualify, but these 2 would. Just keep in mind you have to set different facets to the correct pitches based on your pitch gauges that you put on slopes in the field. And so now we have these 2 pitches. We would include 6.14 squares of steep charges, these 2 pitches together. Very, very important. Okay, so let's delete this roof and go over just a few other things. Let me go back to the brake tool real quick. This is a very common drawing that you'll see. Oop, wrong one, my bad. Let's do a gable. You'll very commonly see, let's say, a gable, main gable on the house. It may have some bump outs and porches or back sunrooms or whatever and dormers, but it has a garage off to the side. It's sort of like a little smaller gable connected to it with the front slope as one continuous slope connecting. How do you do that? Okay, well, you can grab a gable, of course, as always, pull it out to the correct measurements, the rake and all, and then manually intersect it. You'll notice I didn't quite get it. If we scroll down, we'll see that it's not quite lined up properly. Scroll down to do that with your scroll wheel, your mouse wheel, but usually you can get it to snap in. There we go. So you can do it this way, and then you can drag this roof out to the correct rakes and the correct length from the wall. You would have had these measurements anyway from the field. You can certainly do it this way. Remember, we have to subgroup this one together if we're going to replace the roof. it's much easier and quicker to use the brake tool. Click on the brake tool. We're going to single click anywhere down here on this rake. Remember, we did this to the eaves earlier, but now we're applying the brake tool to the rake. Again, we're going to hold the control key down, pull this handle out, and there is our attached garage, automatically subgrouped, and we can pull it out to the correct dimensions, and we are done. Very, very common roof shape right here. Very quick way to draw it. Let's look at some of the properties. So let's go here and open the properties. We're not going to go over this too terribly deep, but a couple things I want to look at is we want to look at the roof types. You can change roof types. You can change the eave heights in here, remember, but the easier way to do it was, remember, right click and then adjust height. One other, we talked about the overhangs, apologize. You can change that here. Pitches, this is where you're going to change pitches. This is where you can get all of your variable codes. Here's all the variable codes. You can actually type these codes into line items, or maybe your macros already have those, and it will automatically pull these measurements in as long as you're putting these line items with these codes in a blue sketched room in your estimating tree. The other thing I want to go over briefly that's not really common, but you'll see it, is rafter links and locks. This is confusing to adjusters at first, but it's actually pretty simple. You can lock all these down or unlock these things. By default, they're typically unlocked. But let's say that you have a roof, and one measurement is 18 feet, and the other measurement is 10 feet. So let's get these at 18 feet. Well, that is not cooperating with me, so we'll do it the old-fashioned way. So if we were to try to drag these down, this back slope, let's say, is 9 foot, and we were trying to drag this to 9, it's pulling the ridge and it's making both slopes 9 feet. We don't want that. We want this at 18 and the other one at 9 or 10 or whatever it is. Let's get this back at 18 feet. And the way you do that is you lock this slope down. So let's go do that. Properties. We're going to lock B. Run B. So we're going to lock this. And some adjusters will go lock this down. They'll click on the lock, padlock it down, and they'll say, okay, I'm good to go, and then they'll drag this. But if you'll notice, if I get to certain measurements, it won't let me do it. The roof span cannot be modified until one of the properties is unlocked. So what you always have to do is, not only do you need to lock down the rafter, B, in this case, you want to lock down the ridge. So we're going to go to the ridge, run B, and it's locked, and then rafter B. Those are the two things you want to lock down. Now we should be able to pull this down to, say, 9 feet. And let's look at the sketch. So, again, this isn't that complicated. A few main things, again, to think about is the height off the ground, using the brake tool. Practice with using some of these tools, rotating things, pulling things up off the ground, and using some of the property settings as well. So I hope that makes sense. We'll see you on the next video. If you have any questions, contact your claim supervisor or manager. Thanks again and have a great day.